So the strategic environment that's shaping up in the region at large is a fight between them and Saudi Arabia. And the Iranians are coming off of kind of a 15-year build in influence. The American war on terror was a miscalculation in several ways, but it honestly broke down the pre-existing structures in the region and allowed the Iranians to come in and sweep the board. But you can't control an empire without expending assets, and so they ended up overextending, and now they're broken. The whole thing is going to hell. The Saudis don't care what happens to the region so long as Iran doesn't get it. So the Saudis are busy spawning groups like ISIS or echo groups that are now starting to pop up throughout Iraq and Syria with the simple intent of burning the entire region down. And they're probably going to get exactly what they're after. Sure. So Iran, unlike Saudi Arabia or any of the Gulf states, it's not a desert republic, and it wasn't founded on oil. It was founded on a specific group, the Persians loosening up the definition of what Persian meant in order to evolve and absorb other groups. It is almost American in the way that they were able to define their ethnicity. And because of that, Iran has always been this store of cultural value going back to antiquity. That doesn't mean you have to like them. I mean, they're still a country, they were still an empire. But there's a reason why the United States got along so well with the Iranians once we got over the coup stuff in the 50s. By the 60s and the 70s, they were a firm ally. And we have a lot more culturally in common between Iran and the West in general than between the Arab world of the Arabian Peninsula and the West in general. It feels different. It feels alien. It is exotic. There's no arguing any of those points. But compared to the countries that border Persia, this is a fairly close cultural cousin. Sure. Everyone in the Anglosphere loves to take the piss out of the French. I get it. I've certainly had my fun doing that too. But what we forget, or what we refuse to admit, maybe is a better way to phrase it, is that the French have won more military conflicts than any country in the world, with the exception of the Brits. They're second. That's pretty good. In biotech, they're second. In manufacturing, they're second. In electronification, they're second. In computing, they're second. This is a real place. And their physical security is actually pretty good. They really only have the Northern European plain that is a physical weak point. They've got mountains pretty much everywhere else. They're usually one of the top 5 navies in the world. Right now, I would say they're third. Once the Brits get their supercarriers up and running, the French will probably fall back to fourth, but that's still pretty good. They don't have to deal with any of the security concerns of a more aggressive Iran or a more aggressive Russia or collapsing China. That's problems for somebody else. So once the European system hits the rocks, which I think it will, the French are the country that is going to fall the least distance, but has the greatest capacity to rejuvenate itself. It has a self-sustaining population. It's got an advanced industrial base. It's got a unified culture. It's financially flush. Globally speaking, this is a very successful country that has proven that it can survive the test of times. I mean, it's freaking 1,500 years old, and it's still going, and its best days are ahead of it. And that means that, unlike the United States, which does a thorough census every 10 years, so at least gets a more or less accurate picture of its population structure, in France, you can't do that. So we really don't know. I mean, I can tell you that the population structure, demographically speaking, on the whole, in France is pretty positive, but I can't tell you what percentage of that are white Frenchmen versus Polish imports versus Algerian imports. We just don't know. And as long as the French refuse to have a conversation with themselves about the implications of that, and they just kind of fall back on this blind ideology that they're an inclusive society when in reality they're not, they are setting themselves up for an internal purge. That doesn't have to be violent. Sure. So the 2 big problems are demographic and structural. The demographic situation is pretty straightforward. Europe is vastly aged past the point of no return. The only 3 European countries that have demographies that are anywhere near healthy are Sweden, not in the Eurozone, Britain, no longer in the EU at all, and France, which is perfectly willing to take its marbles and go home. It tries to keep as much of its market within the French system as possible. They don't like to integrate if they can avoid it. Everyone else is well past terminal, which means that the only way that sort of demographic can function is if it can export all of its product. which means that they're now completely 100% dependent upon importing countries like the United States for the market and security countries like the United States in order to provide the structure that allows those exports in the first place. All of that is going away. All of that will be gone in just a couple of years, which means everything that has made Europe what it is, all the foundational issues, the environment that has allowed the EU to exist, is just about gone. And the question is, how does Europe culturally adapt to an environment of negative growth for the foreseeable future and breakdowns among the supply chains that are dependent upon a global order that no longer exists? So either a country will have the financial, economic, and strategic heft to hold a tighter group of countries close to it, or it won't. I would argue that the French by far have the most going for them in that regard, because they can keep Iberia on board, probably keep Italy on board, and provide a certain degree of security and energy access that other countries in Europe just can't. I would also argue that Germany, by, how should I put this, force of personality, is going to be able to marshal Central Europe into staying on its side, because the alternative is Russia or destitution. And I would argue that the United Kingdom, because of how long it took the UK to figure out this whole Brexit thing, and it's not done yet, really has no option but to become an economic satellite of the United States. Because the EU doesn't have anything that can help the UK now, and the EU doesn't have anything that can help the UK now, and the things that the UK is demanding of the EU are things that the EU just doesn't have on offer. Those talks are going to end in a complete collapse this year, and every single day that those talks linger on before we get to the eventual rejection is one more day or one fewer day that the Brits will have when they finally go to the Trump administration and ask for a deal. And that deal is going to be ugly, but it's going to be the only thing on offer, and the Brits will take it. If you had asked me 48 hours ago, I would say there was 100% no chance whatsoever this is going to hold together. There's no security basis, there's no economic basis, there's no financial basis, there's no demographic basis, there's just no way that this works.